The folder hit the kitchen table so hard the coffee cups rattled. "I already signed everything," Marcus said, chest puffed out like a man who had just closed the deal of the century. Grace looked up slowly from the plate she was drying, her hands going still. "What did you sign?" "The land." Silence swallowed the kitchen. "Our land?" she asked again, quieter this time, as if repeating it might change the answer. "I sold it this morning," Marcus said, grinning. 60 acres, cash offer, gone." Grace didn't scream. She didn't drop the plate. She set it down gently on the counter, wiped her hands on the dish towel, and looked at her husband of 12 years like she was seeing a stranger standing in her kitchen wearing his face. "To who?" she asked. Marcus laughed, delighted with himself. "The highest bidder, some big development company. Grace, this is the payday we've been waiting for." She studied him for a long moment, and then, impossibly, she smiled. "Good," she said. Marcus blinked. "Good. That's it? No yelling? No crying?" He laughed again, louder this time, clapping his hands together. "See, this is why I love you. You finally understand business." 3 weeks later, Marcus drove out to admire the land he'd sold, champagne dreams still dancing behind his eyes. He wanted to see it one last time before the bulldozers came, to stand on the dirt and imagine the number that was about to land in his bank account. Instead, he found a 12-foot iron gate blocking the entrance, chained and padlocked, with a fresh sign bolted to the post. "Property of GB Holdings, LLC." Marcus barked out a laugh, shaking his head at the absurdity of corporate paperwork moving that fast. "Poor idiot," he muttered, pulling out his phone to snap a photo. "Whoever bought this doesn't even know what they got. They bought my land." That's when the black SUV rolled up behind him, gravel crunching under its tires. A woman in a tailored navy blazer stepped out, sunglasses catching the afternoon light. An attorney followed close behind her, holding a small brass ring of keys. The attorney handed the keys to the woman. Marcus's smile began to falter. "Grace?" The woman took off her sunglasses. "You?" Marcus's voice cracked. "You bought... This is... Grace, this doesn't make sense. I sold this land." She walked past him toward the gate, unlocked it with a calm, practiced motion, and turned to face him, the iron bars framing her like a portrait. "You sold it behind my back," Grace said evenly. "I bought it back behind yours." If this story already has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still watching," down below so we know who's paying attention, because the biggest twist hasn't happened yet. And before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, rewind. Because to understand how a woman calmly bought back her own stolen inheritance under a fake company name without her husband noticing a single thing, you have to understand who Grace Bennett really was, and who Marcus Bennett only pretended to be. Grace was 37, sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and quietly take inventory of every person in it before anyone noticed she'd arrived. She ran a bookkeeping and tax consulting firm out of a modest office 2 towns over, the kind of business that didn't announce itself with billboards or flashy branding, but that quietly, steadily, made her rich. Nobody at the barbecues knew that. Nobody at church knew that. As far as most of their circle was concerned, Grace did some accounting stuff, and Marcus was the real breadwinner, the man with the vision. At Marcus's cousin's wedding 2 summers earlier, an uncle had pulled Grace aside during the reception, leaning in with a glass of wine already half gone. "So when's Marcus gonna buy you a bigger house, huh? Boy's always talking about his big plans." Grace had smiled politely. "We're happy where we are." "Man needs to step it up," the uncle pressed. "A woman like you deserves more." She hadn't corrected him. She never corrected anyone. It was easier, most days, to let the world believe whatever story it wanted to believe about her marriage than to explain the truth. That the modest house, The paid-off cars, the retirement accounts steadily growing in the background. All of it existed because of decisions she made quietly while Marcus took credit loudly. Marcus believed that too. Fully, completely. He was 40, handsome in a way that photographed well, always dressed like he just stepped out of a magazine spread about success, even when the watch on his wrist was financed and the car in the driveway was leased. Marcus didn't just want to be successful. He wanted to look successful, and to him, those were often the same thing. Their mornings had a rhythm. Marcus would sit at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone, reading headlines about crypto and real estate flips, nodding along like he understood every word. "You've got to spend money to make money, Grace," he'd say, tapping the screen. "That's the secret nobody tells you." "We're spending more than we're making, Marcus," Grace would reply, not even looking up from her ledger. He'd wave her off with a laugh. "That's because you think small. I think big." Thinking big, in Marcus's world, meant a new set of golf clubs for networking. It meant a $3,000 wealth-building seminar in Orlando that promised to teach him the mindset of millionaires and taught him nothing except how to lose $3,000. It meant gadgets that arrived in boxes and were used exactly once before being shoved into the garage with the others. Grace paid the mortgage. Quietly, Grace paid the insurance. Quietly. Grace kept 2 separate savings accounts that Marcus didn't know existed, because somewhere in the first 2 years of their marriage, she had learned that being the responsible one meant also being the invisible one, and she had made an uneasy peace with that. There was one thing Marcus loved to joke about more than anything else: the 60 acres of inherited land sitting on the edge of town, quiet and undeveloped, fields of tall grass and a single dirt road cutting through the middle of it. The world's most expensive ant farm, he called it, every single time it came up. At barbecues, at birthdays, at his mother's Thanksgiving table. "Grace over here is sitting on a fortune of dirt," he'd say, and the whole table would laugh, and Grace would laugh too, because that's what you did, because arguing about it never seemed worth the energy. But there was one person at the table who never laughed. Harold Simmons, 70-something now, a retired land surveyor who had known Grace's grandmother for 40 years, would just sit there quietly, watching the land come up in conversation, his eyes drifting somewhere far off like he was seeing something none of them could see. Grace noticed. She always noticed, but she never asked. What she did remember, clear as a bell, was the last conversation she'd had with her grandmother before she passed. The old woman had gripped Grace's hand with a strength that surprised her and said, "Never sell this land unless your heart agrees before your wallet does. Do you hear me, baby? Your heart first." Grace had promised. She hadn't fully understood the weight of that promise at the time. She would. It started, as these things often do, with a whisper Marcus heard at a barber shop. A friend of a friend who worked in county zoning mentioned, off the record, that a massive shopping and lifestyle district was about to be announced just outside town, and that land values in the surrounding area were about to explode. Marcus's eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting 777s. He called Trevor Collins that same night. Trevor was a real estate broker with a voice made for shouting across crowded rooms and a business card that promised more than he ever delivered. But Marcus trusted him completely, mostly because Trevor always agreed with him. "Marcus, my man, this is your moment," Trevor said, practically vibrating through the phone. "You sit on that land right now. You're a millionaire by Christmas, but you gotta move fast. Buyers like this don't wait around." "The land's not exactly mine," Marcus admitted. "It's Grace's, from her grandmother." "You're married, aren't you? What's hers is yours. Don't you have power of attorney from when she had that surgery a few years back?" Marcus went quiet, thinking. He did remember signing something back then. Some document Grace's lawyer had drawn up temporarily so he could handle her affairs while she recovered from a procedure. He was almost certain it had expired. He chose not to think too hard about the word almost. "Yeah," Marcus said slowly. "Yeah, I think I still have that. Then what are you waiting for? Marcus dug through an old filing cabinet until he found it. A limited, temporary power of attorney, expired for over 2 years. The fine print he never bothered to read because reading fine print wasn't something men who thought big did. He photocopied it anyway, tucked it into a folder, and drove to meet the developers with a confidence that should have belonged to someone who'd actually done his homework. He signed. He shook hands. He smiled for a photo he later deleted because Trevor said it looked bad legally, but great for the vibe. Later that afternoon, Marcus called his mother, unable to contain himself. "Ma, you're not going to believe it. I just closed the biggest deal of my life." "What deal, baby?" "Grace's land. The old family plot. I sold it. We're talking numbers you wouldn't believe." There was a long pause on the line. "Marcus, did Grace agree to this?" "Grace doesn't need to agree to everything, Ma. I'm the man of the house. Somebody's got to make the big decisions." His mother sighed the way she always did when she disapproved, but knew arguing wouldn't change anything. "That land was her grandmother's, Marcus. Be careful." "Careful is for people who never win," Marcus said, laughing off the warning like he laughed off everything else. That night, Marcus didn't tell Grace a single word. Instead, he opened his laptop and ordered a case of champagne. He booked a vacation package to Cabo, just to hold the dates. He walked into a dealership and drove off in a brand new SUV, before a single dollar had actually hit his account, on the strength of nothing but his own certainty. He even had business cards printed. Marcus Bennett, real estate investor, they read, in a gold-embossed font he'd picked out himself. He handed them out at the gas station, at the barber shop, to the mailman, who accepted one with polite confusion and never called the number printed on it. He gave one to Trevor, who already had his number saved, and Trevor pretended to be impressed anyway, because that was the entire foundation of their friendship. At dinner with his mother that week, Marcus couldn't stop talking about the vacation he'd booked. "Cabo, Ma. Ocean View Suite. I'm thinking we do a big family trip once the money clears. You, me, Grace, the kids from my sister's side." "Has the money cleared yet?" his mother asked, buttering a roll without looking up. "Any day now," Marcus said. "These things take a little time to process, that's all." She said, in a tone that carried 40 years of raising him and not being fooled by a single word. Grace still knew nothing. Then, one gray Tuesday afternoon, she walked out to the mailbox in her robe, coffee in hand, expecting bills and coupon flyers. Instead, tucked between an insurance statement and a grocery ad, was an official notification of ownership transfer, the deed to her grandmother's land, no longer in her name. She stood there in the driveway for a long moment, the paper trembling slightly in her hand, though her face gave away nothing. "He actually did it," she whispered. "If you're still watching up to now, type 'I'm still here' in the comments section, because what Grace did next is the reason this story has been keeping people up at night. She didn't storm into the house. She didn't confront him at the door. Grace walked back inside, set her coffee down on the counter with a steady hand, and picked up her phone. She called one person, Evelyn Brooks, the sharp, dry-humored attorney who had handled her late grandmother's estate and who Grace trusted with things she trusted almost no one else with. "Evelyn," Grace said, her voice flat and controlled, "I need an LLC formed, tonight if possible, before sunrise." "That bad?" Evelyn asked. "Worse. By morning, GB Holdings LLC existed on paper, a company with no name attached that anyone in town would recognize. Its ownership structured so quietly that even a determined search would only lead back to a maze of documents and a registered agent's office 3 states away. Marcus didn't know. Trevor didn't know. Nobody at the barbershop, nobody at church, nobody at the barbecues where Marcus had made his tired joke 100 times over. Nobody knew. Grace had learned, over years of quietly running her own successful business while everyone assumed her husband was the real earner, that the most powerful thing a person can do is let people underestimate them completely. Evelyn dug into the sale within days and found exactly what Grace suspected. The power of attorney Marcus had used was expired. The transaction built on a foundation that could collapse the second anyone with legal knowledge looked at it closely. But Grace didn't want a lawsuit. A lawsuit would be loud, messy, humiliating for everyone, dragged out over years in a courtroom while the land sat in limbo. Grace wanted something quieter, something permanent. She waited. Just as Evelyn predicted, the flawed paperwork surfaced during the developer's own due diligence, and panic set in on their end. Legal complications meant delays. Delays meant money bleeding out of their timeline. They needed to offload the parcel fast, quietly, before their investors started asking uncomfortable questions. That's when an anonymous offer landed on their desk, lower than what they'd paid Marcus, but clean, immediate. No contingencies, no fuss. They accepted within 48 hours. Grace bought back her grandmother's land, under a name Marcus had never heard, using money Marcus never knew she had, closing the deal in a conference room he would never step foot in. "You know," Evelyn said, sliding the final signed documents across the table toward Grace after the closing, "most women in your position would have gone straight for his throat. Frozen the accounts, called a divorce lawyer before he even got home that night." "I thought about it," Grace admitted, capping her pen. "For about 4 minutes. What stopped you?" Grace looked out the office window, toward the direction of the land neither of them could see from here, but both knew was waiting, quiet and patient, the way it had waited for decades before either of them was born. "My grandmother didn't raise me to react," she said. "She raised me to respond. There's a difference. Reacting is what Marcus does. Fast, loud, whatever feels good in the moment. Responding takes longer. It costs more up front, but it lasts." Evelyn smiled, tapping the folder closed. "Well, Ms. Bennett, or should I say, Ms. G.B. Holdings, you just responded your husband right out of 60 acres and about to respond him right out of his own ego, too." "That part," Grace said, standing to leave, "he's going to do to himself. I just have to wait." Marcus, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was happening. He was far too busy becoming obsessed with a single, burning question. Who was the mystery billionaire who'd swooped in and bought the land out from under the whole operation? His theories grew more absurd by the week. At dinner one night, he leaned across the table, eyes wide with conviction. "I'm telling you, Grace, it's got to be someone huge. Elon Musk's people, maybe. Or Tyler Perry. He's always buying up land around Atlanta. Oprah has that thing about legacy projects. Could even be a retired NBA player looking for a tax write-off, or..." He lowered his voice like he was sharing state secrets. "Foreign royalty. I heard some of these Middle Eastern families buy land under fake companies just to stay under the radar." Grace sipped her tea. "Interesting theory, right? Trevor thinks it's foreign royalty, too." Trevor, predictably, believed every single theory Marcus floated, nodding along with the same misplaced enthusiasm he brought to every bad idea he'd ever had. Desperate for answers, Marcus took matters into his own hands one humid evening, dressing himself head to toe in camouflage gear he'd bought years ago for a hunting trip he never actually went on. He climbed the fence at the edge of the property under cover of near darkness, convinced he was about to uncover the identity of the mystery owner and somehow negotiate his way back into a deal. He made it about 40 feet before a flashlight beam hit him square in the face. "Back again." The security guard sighed, clearly unimpressed. Marcus froze, twigs in his hair, dignity nowhere to be found. "You remember me? You've been removed 6 times. Marcus was escorted off the property for the 6th time in a month, muttering about conspiracies the whole way to his car. While Marcus chased shadows, cracks were forming in the marriage that had nothing to do with land and everything to do with trust. Grace began noticing that no matter what move Marcus made, whichever bank he approached, whichever zoning board he tried to charm, whichever lawyer he hired for a consultation, someone always seemed to already know his next step, already have him beaten before he opened his mouth. He didn't know it was Grace, quietly working behind the scenes through Evelyn, closing every door before he even found the handle. "It's like she's a ghost," Marcus complained to Trevor one afternoon. "Every single move I make, she's already 3 steps ahead. Whoever's behind that LLC has spies everywhere." "Maybe you're just cursed on this deal," Trevor offered unhelpfully. The arguments at home stopped being about money. They became something deeper, something rawer. "When exactly did I become someone you needed to deceive?" Grace asked him one night, standing in the doorway of their bedroom, arms crossed, voice steady but eyes glassy in the low light. Marcus opened his mouth to answer and found nothing there. The silence between them stretched out, heavy and unbearable. The kind of silence that says more than any shouting match ever could. "I thought I was protecting us," he finally said, his voice smaller than she'd ever heard it. "I thought if I could just land this one deal, everything else would fall into place. I'd finally be the one who provided, the one who made the big move." "I never asked you to provide alone, Marcus," Grace said. "I asked you to trust me enough to include me. There's a difference between being a partner and being managed." "I'm not trying to manage you. You forged your way into my grandmother's land with an expired document, Marcus. You didn't ask. You didn't even consider asking. You decided I was an obstacle to your plan, not a person in your marriage." Her voice cracked, just slightly. The first real fracture in her composure since the whole ordeal began. "Do you understand what that land meant to me? Do you understand what it meant to her?" "I thought it was just dirt, Grace. I really did. I didn't understand." "That's the problem," she said. "You never asked. You assumed. You've been assuming things about me since the day we got married, and I let you, because it was easier than fighting about it. But this crossed a line I don't know how to uncross." He reached for her hand. She let him hold it for exactly 3 seconds before gently pulling away. "I don't know what I need from you right now," Grace admitted. "But it isn't flowers. It isn't chocolate. It's the truth. Every time, from now on. Or it's nothing." He tried in his own clumsy way to fix things. He showed up with flowers, which Grace accepted politely and then quietly gave to a neighbor. He brought chocolate, which she handed off to their mail carrier without a second thought. He stood outside their bedroom window one night with a guitar he barely knew how to play and attempted a serenade so off-key that 3 different neighbors threw pillows at him from their windows, shouting for him to stop. He even rented a horse-drawn carriage, an absurd, over-the-top gesture that ended with the horse biting him squarely on the arm in front of a small crowd that had gathered to watch. The entire humiliating scene captured on someone's phone, and, thanks to Trevor accidentally uploading it instead of a listing video, viewed by millions online within days. Marcus Bennett became, briefly and painfully, a local meme. The man bitten by karma, quite literally, in horse form. Grace didn't laugh at his humiliation, but she also didn't rush to comfort him. "I never needed the land for money, Marcus," she finally told him one evening, sitting across from him at the kitchen table where this whole nightmare had begun. "I have accounts you've never seen, properties you don't know about, businesses that have nothing to do with either of us that have been quietly supporting this family for years while you were out buying gadgets you called investments." Marcus stared at her, stunned into a silence that felt different from all the others. You've had all that? This whole time?" "This was never about money for me," Grace said, her voice softening for the first time in weeks. "It was about a promise. My grandmother made me promise never to sell that land unless my heart agreed before my wallet did." "You didn't just sell dirt, Marcus. You sold a piece of her. Without asking, without even wondering if maybe there was a reason I never sold it myself all these years, even when we needed the money." The town called a public meeting once word spread that the mysterious GB Holdings LLC was finally ready to reveal its plans for the property everyone had been speculating about for months. The old community center filled up fast, folding chairs scraping against the floor, neighbors whispering theories to each other in the same breathless tone Marcus had used at his own dinner table. Marcus walked in wearing his best suit, confident, ready to negotiate, still half convinced he could talk his way into some kind of partnership with whoever this mystery owner turned out to be. The mayor stepped up to the podium, tapped the microphone twice, and smiled out at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce the owner of GB Holdings and the true steward of this land." Grace walked onto the small stage in a simple charcoal dress, her chin lifted, her hands steady at her sides. The room erupted into applause. Marcus's face drained of all color. Beside him, Trevor's coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, the sound swallowed by the noise of the crowd. In the back row, Harold Simmons smiled, slow and knowing, like a man who had waited decades to see this exact moment arrive. Harold stood, uninvited, and asked to speak. The room quieted as he made his way to the front, leaning slightly on his cane. "Most of you don't know this," Harold began, his voice rough with age but clear. "Back when I was surveying land all over this county, Grace's grandmother had offers on that land more than once. Big offers, for the time. She turned every single one of them down. I asked her why once, and she told me. She said, 'Harold, this town is going to need this land one day, and it isn't going to need it for another parking lot.' She held on to it for decades because she believed in something the rest of us couldn't see yet." Marcus sat frozen in his chair, the weight of every joke he'd ever made about the world's most expensive ant farm pressing down on him all at once. The developers, still eager despite everything that had happened, returned to the table with a new offer. Millions more than what Marcus had originally sold it for. More money than either of them had ever imagined touching. Marcus, still chasing the old dream even after everything, leaned toward Grace during a quiet moment and whispered, "Grace, please, just take the deal. We could be set for life. We could fix everything." Grace looked at him for a long moment, and then she stood, walked back to the podium, and unveiled the real plan, the one she had been building in secret for months, sketched out across blueprints Marcus had never seen tucked away in a home office he'd never once thought to ask about. The land, she explained, would not become another shopping plaza or luxury development indistinguishable from a dozen others popping up across the county. It would become something else entirely. A marketplace built for the community that raised her, storefronts for local black-owned businesses that could never afford commercial rent anywhere else in town. A small business incubator to help first-time entrepreneurs get off the ground the way she once had to, alone, with no one showing her the way. Affordable retail spaces, community gardens where neighbors could grow food together, a financial literacy center, so no family in this town would ever again feel as powerless around money as she once had, and a women's entrepreneurship hub, built specifically for women like her. Quiet, capable, underestimated women who had been carrying more than anyone around them ever realized. She named the entire project after her grandmother. The room rose to its feet. Marcus sat there, tears finally spilling down his face. Not because of the money he'd lost, not because of the humiliation, not even because of the marriage hanging by a thread, but because for the first time, he truly understood what he had almost destroyed. Not property, not an asset, a legacy, decades in the making that his arrogance had come within weeks of erasing forever. Months passed. The marketplace opened on a bright Saturday morning, ribbon cut by Grace herself with her grandmother's old garden shears, because Grace insisted on it, laughing softly when Evelyn asked why. Storefronts filled with new business owners who had once been told banks weren't interested in their ideas. Children ran between the community garden rows while their parents shopped at stalls that hadn't existed a year earlier. The place hummed with a kind of life that no shopping plaza ever could have brought. Trevor, having lost nearly everything through a string of bad investments that finally caught up with him, rented a small office in the very same marketplace, joking to anyone who'd listen that he was finally working on land he once tried to flip, though this time he was actually earning an honest paycheck. Marcus, humbled in a way that had genuinely changed him, began volunteering at the business center several afternoons a week, helping other men avoid the exact mistakes he had made, teaching what he'd learned the hardest way possible. One afternoon, a visitor wandered through the marketplace, admiring the storefronts, and asked Marcus who owned this beautiful place. Marcus smiled, pointed across the courtyard to where Grace stood laughing with a group of new business owners, sunlight catching the edges of her dark hair. "My wife," he said, pride finally, genuinely, in his voice. Then he added, quieter, almost to himself, "And this time, I made sure the paperwork had the right name on it." Grace, overhearing, laughed, really laughed. The kind of laugh that hadn't come easily between them in a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, they laughed together. Later that evening, after the marketplace had closed for the day and the last of the vendors had packed up their stalls, Grace and Marcus sat together on a bench near the community garden, watching the sun sink low over rows of tomatoes and collard greens that neighbors had planted with their own hands. "I used to think success meant everyone looking at me," Marcus said quietly, staring out at the garden. "Watches, cars, business cards nobody asked for. I thought if people were impressed, I'd finally feel like enough." "And now?" Grace asked. "Now I think I just wanted to matter to somebody. I went about it all wrong. I tried to build a version of myself you'd be proud of instead of just talking to you, telling you when I was scared we weren't enough." Grace reached over and took his hand, the way she used to before the folder ever hit the kitchen table. "You are enough, Marcus. You always were. You just needed to stop performing long enough to notice." He turned to look at her, eyes still red from earlier. "Thank you for not giving up on us, even when I gave you every reason to." "I didn't do it for you," Grace said honestly. "I did it for her." She nodded toward the sign above the marketplace entrance, her grandmother's name carved into reclaimed wood. "But somewhere along the way, I realized I wanted to do it for us too." The camera of this story could rise slowly over that thriving marketplace now, over the gardens and the storefronts and the children weaving between them. While somewhere underneath it all, her grandmother's words still echo the way they had echoed in Grace's heart every single day since that hospital bed. Land can be sold, but a legacy cannot. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't taking back what was stolen from you. It's building something so meaningful, so lasting, that even the person who betrayed you ends up wishing they had believed in your vision from the very beginning. Grace never needed to destroy Marcus to win. She simply needed to keep a promise, protect what mattered, and let her patience outlast his arrogance. That's the whole lesson wrapped inside this story. Quiet strength almost always outlasts loud confidence, and the people who underestimate you today are often the ones applauding you loudest tomorrow. So here's what we want to know from you. What would you have done if your spouse secretly sold your family's land behind your back? Could you have forgiven Marcus after everything he put Grace through, or would you have walked away for good? Was Grace right to build a community instead of cashing in on the highest offer? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and we love seeing where this story took you emotionally. Thank you so much for watching this one all the way through. Stories like this take real time and heart to put together, and it means everything that you spent your afternoon or evening here with us. Tell us in the comments what part of this story you enjoyed the most, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next emotional, cinematic story, full of twists, laughter, heartbreak, and unforgettable endings. We'll see you in the next one.